Hi, welcome to Macroeconomics, our first class together. We're going to start off by looking at what's coming up. So we have a week 9 overview. Okay, just like we're in regular class, we always start off here to see what's coming up this week. And as we scroll down, we see we have some things due on Wednesday and some things due on Friday and even next week. Some other things that are on here is we have our new syllabus. Okay, so when you click on that, the new syllabus will come up and you can see exactly what we have coming up with our new semester together. So we have 6 weeks that we're doing online. And looking at the new syllabus, here we are March 30th. We're going to be finishing off 2.10 and 2.11, which we actually did on the last day of class before we went on break. And then when we get online, we're going to be starting to work on economics and the environment, which is something you guys were interested in when I did the initial meetings with you at the beginning of the semester. A lot of people were interested in learning more about economics and the environment. So we have 2 weeks of work in that. And then after that, we're doing a special unit on COVID-19. So CORE actually is creating a special unit on that. We'll spend 2 weeks looking at that, putting together our ideas for our final project, take a quick peek into econ politics and public policy, very important with the elections coming up, and boom, we're done. Okay, so grading has stayed the same, but what's changed now is just the content of the last 6 weeks of our time together. And not even so much the content, but more the focus. Okay, if I jump back to our home page here where we're looking at our overview, there's a couple of new things in here. The big thing on the left here is we have modules. That's where you're going to find most of everything. That's where I recommend you start each week. Okay, so each week will start with an announcement that'll be introducing the week to you, sort of what I'm doing now. If I go back to the module, after the announcement, then you have the overview, which we're currently going on. And then we have our weekly class check-in on Teams, okay, which happens every Monday during our class time. And it's also recorded, so you can go and check on it later if you don't make it. And then we have our lecture, and that's where you're finding this video right now is in our lecture. Normally the lecture would be only lecture, but I'm using this little preemptory beginning part just to frame where we are with this lecture. Then you have your assignment, which the lecture is linked to. We have an online discussion, okay, which in our case this week is going to be about practicing online discussions, but later it'll be about the coursework. Then we have our wiki, which is coming from our current event. So each of you will be in charge of a topic for the wiki, and then all of you as a class will be posting and adding more information on that, and we'll practice that this week as well. We have a quiz coming up for Unit 2. I've given you an example of that already in class. Let me just pop this open. I've attached it to the quiz. So if you scroll down to the bottom of quiz 2, which is also in your course book, what I did was I created a demand curve model based on what was happening with the coronavirus right when we left to go for break. I saw that, oh, this is an interesting model that could make sense for a quiz. And actually the one that I used was this one. Okay, and what I was looking at is the relationship of the healthcare systems to COVID-19 mortality, and finding that if we take measures, we have a slower reaction over a longer period of time, where if we don't take measures, we get over with it fast and furious, but it really taxes out our healthcare system. So what's going to be the right way to go? And we see countries are constantly kind of going back and forth on how much is too much, where's that sweet spot. So what I did for my model was I created a scenario of one country having a few kits. So there was a lot of undiagnosed cases and a high mortality, and then another country investing into better testing and having that change. And I had that happen with a demand curve. Okay, so here we have few tests and high mortality. Okay, that's point A, we can say. And then we increased the number of tests, and we also lowered the mortality. So that could be point B. Okay, and I was modeling that. Good, so that's an example of the quiz, and that's due next week. If anyone needs help or questions, I'm available during our regular class times for office hours, so you can always just meet with me then. If I go back to my modules, okay, that's always a good place to go. And as you go through your module, also you'll see, let's say we're going to our lecture, right, which is where this will be posted. There's always that next button that takes you to the next thing that needs to get done. And then once you finish that, you can go to the next thing. Okay, so those are really good ways to get through the different elements of our modules. Okay, but really what I'm here to do today and in the future, what I will always be doing with this tool is the lecture. Okay, so let's go take a look at that. So our lecture is about 2.9, 2.10, and the conclusion. So let's go to our core book here. And here we have 2.9. And we're going to be looking at this in relation to our workbook. So let's go and open up our workbook. Okay, and here we have 2.9. So in our workbook, you can see I have some things already typed in here in blue, which is work that we'd already done in class. So the last day of class, we actually did do this. So those of you that were there and were focused, this might look familiar. Those of you that weren't, I'm keeping this in the book because it is work that we had done together. But basically what we're looking at this point is we're looking at the Malthusian model of economics, right? And he was saying how there's a natural rhythm to life where populations soar, and then there's scarce resources, overcrowding, disease, populations then drop. Because of that, there's better production per person because they have more resources and space to work. They become more efficient. They end up creating more things. Then the population increases again because their health is good and they have a lot of resources available, and then the population's too big, so it goes back down again. Sort of the story that we had talked about with foxes and rabbits, and the cycle of abundance of resources leads to abundance of population, leads to not enough resources and a natural decline in population. And that's what Malthus was saying is a natural part of human development, as he's at this point of extreme change when we're just starting to get into the Industrial Revolution and the whole world is changing around him, right? And we have this big potato famine in Ireland, and Malthus is recommending that things stay as is so that they can run their natural course. And now we're starting to understand, well, how can that be understood differently? So if we look at our workbook, how does a model of Malthusian economics help to explain the rise and fall of incomes between 1300 and 1600 in England? Okay, so if we're looking at this is our real wage index, right? So this is wages from 1850, put into just a comparative range. Okay, so we're not looking at inflation, we're just looking at the actual money, the value of that money. And so in this period of time, we have the Black Death. Boom, population drops, so do wages. Okay, but then once we reach that sweet spot, we start seeing wages go back up again because workers are no longer a dime a dozen, right? We don't have that many workers anymore. So because we don't have that many workers, now they become more valuable. At this point, 1351, laborers are able to organize and demand better wages. Okay, and we're starting to see this rise in wages, and then we see this decline again. Okay, and what we talked about in class was how it cycles back and forth, right, between 50 and 100, and as the disease and population declines or regulates the wages, we just have this constant up and down, okay, and this idea of stagnant growth. Now, if we take a look at what that means in the textbook, let's jump over here and see what the experts are actually telling us. Okay, so here we have we're in chapter 2.9, okay, looking at long-term economic stagnation, because the thing is we want to get out of this trap, right? We want to get out of this decline, increase, we just want to be able to increase, okay? We don't want this back and forth anymore. And the Malthusian interpretation was that higher real wages led to young couples to marry earlier, have more kids, lower death rates, and we have this population growth, workers become a dime a dozen, wages go back to being low, subsistence levels, and you just have this cycle now with low incomes, right? Every time incomes raise, populations raise, and then populations drop. Okay, so when you're looking at this model, okay, we want to see it becomes predictive, right? And we also want to see, well, what can we do to make this change? Okay, and here we have the real wage index and we have our population. Okay, so as our population increases, sure enough, no matter what the time period is, we're seeing this downward trend in wages. Okay, now if we look at our model here, okay, this is explaining in a little bit more detail what we were just looking at in the workbook. Okay, so here's the whole story. We have this idea of Black Death, and then we have our population and labor supply fall. Because of that, then there's better land for people to get because there's less people using the land. And then the average output per farmer rises because I can grow more beans on 5 acres than I can on 1 acre because I don't have to share those acres with my brothers because they no longer live, right? So I have more access to resources and I can do a better job with what I have. At the beginning, so if we follow this down here, the bargaining powers of farmers and employees raise, right, as the population and labor supply fall, right, because workers are no longer a dime a dozen. So now the peasants can revolt. They can say, you know what, we're tired of being treated poorly. We want to be treated better. So now the income needs to go up, okay? Population is going up, okay? I'm producing more. It's costing me more. I'm living better. I have more people. All of a sudden, lo and behold, I have less land again, okay? Because I have more people in my family to divide the land up amongst. The average output per farmer falls. The bargaining power of the farmer and the employee falls because now they're a dime a dozen. If you don't want to work for $2 an hour, 5 other people will, okay? And then that results in rural income and wages falling. So if we take a look at that over time, okay, we see the places where these things are acting out. Okay, so there's our Black Death story. Okay, and there we're seeing the drop in population. Okay, we're seeing the peasants' revolts. This area here is becoming alive and the wages are going up. Now we're back down here. Okay, we see that decline. Okay, we continue, we look at the whole story. Okay, and we go back down here and see how the model helps to explain the rise and fall of income. Okay, going back to our workbook, okay, we have the cause and effect diagram, right? What we have just gone over. And here it uses many ceteris paribus assumptions, right? Remember, ceteris paribus is about taking this one isolated event outside of everything else that could be happening around it. Okay, so we're not taking into account improved technology, or we're not taking into account the fact that maybe people can purchase more land, or we're not taking into effect climate change, right? Instead, we're just looking at a very simple model of population, labor, production. Okay, and then the question is, how does this simplify reality? And that's why. Okay, everything is resting with the other. There's no cause and effect. Nothing is really isolated. And what's been left out are some of the things I've already mentioned. And these are some of the things that you guys had mentioned in class. Okay, so society, social impact, individual well-being, empathetic understanding. Okay, and then you guys get to redraw the figure to include other factors that you might think are important. Something that I might draw in here would be the sale of land, right? So on this part here where we have average output for farmer rises, wages rise, so population rises, less land per farmer, I might make a new piece here that says purchases land, right? Because now I have more money, more people, I can go purchase land. And now that creates a whole different area of economic growth because I'm not limited in just a small amount of land that my one family has. I can purchase other land. Okay, so that might be something I would draw in there. So far, so good. So chapter 2.10, we're looking at our escaping from stagnation, right? How do we get out of that trap? An economist tells stories with pictures, so you get to summarize the story here, right? What do we see happening? And so here's our population and here's our wages. Okay, so we already saw that one piece of evidence in the last chapter about how wages drop as population grows. But what we didn't see was what happened next. Okay, and here's the big difference. So here's the 1700s and the 1800s. So, and this is where the escape happens. So when we're looking in Malthus's point of view from the 13th to the 16th century, where we had that stagnation, that long stem to the hockey stick, okay, we had those constant cycles and those downward turns. But then what happened was in the 18th century, we had the Industrial Revolution and everything changed. Because what happened was I could start making more, I could differentiate my production, I could be selling products in new ways, I could be owning new things that never existed. I'm creating all kinds of new economies. My population is growing, my production is growing. In the beginning, my wages dropped, okay, just as we would expect, except then they started to rise. Because what happened was workers were no longer a dime a dozen, even though there was many workers, is because we had the specialization, right? Workers could become experts in certain areas that required their payment. They could be college educated, trade educated, but because of the sophisticated machinery and the new trades that we have with the Industrial Revolution, the new processes and opportunities, there was many places where people could differentiate and specialize, and then they could increase their wage earning. Okay, here we have the escape shown in more detail. Okay, and let's go and take a look at what the book has to say about this. And the question I have here for you guys are, what are the other things that affected a greater change that led to the permanent technological revolution? Okay, so here they're talking about certain key things. Okay, acts that are protecting child laborers, inventions such as the spinning jenny and the steam engine, voting rights, right? So we're looking at how the political, cultural, social, economic, technological, all of those different environments and the changes in those environments led to the escaping of this Malthusian trap. So let's go back to our textbook. Okay, so far so good. All right, and we're going to go to 210. Okay, escaping from Malthusian stagnation. And anytime you guys need to pause this, take a break, just do that. Probably have about 10 more minutes on this. Okay, so escaping from Malthusian stagnation, what we're looking at here is the things that weren't included, right? Improvements in technology could happen at a faster rate than population growth, okay? Offsetting that diminishing average product of labor, okay? That's what I just mentioned. Also, what else do we have? Living standards changed, okay? The Malthusian model was no longer a reasonable description of the world, right? Things were dynamic, things were changing in ways that he could never have imagined, okay? So here we are with our escape, 18th century, boom, okay, jumping right out. Okay, if we take a look at this story here, again, we have two different charts, right? Here we have the entire path. So we have this Industrial Revolution. Now we're looking at 1760 to 1910, okay? So a different time period. This is where we're starting to see that upward trend in our hockey stick, okay? And we're looking at this in much more detail. So we have more embedded capital goods per worker, average output rises, higher profits, okay? Then this is where it changes. We have the expansion of factory production, okay, creating less demand, creating more demand for labor, more demand for labor. And now we have more power of workers, okay? So that's one story. And then the wages rise for the workers, right? Because workers are important. We have another story here. The other story is we have the Industrial Revolution and we have displaced workers, okay? So they need different, they're no longer on the farm, they're now in the cities, okay? They lose their bargaining power, okay? They have nothing to fall back on. Again, they're a dime a dozen. Everyone's fleeing the countryside, moving into the cities. Because they don't have any bargaining power, their wages are stagnant, they're not rising. Meanwhile, the more efficiency that the industrials are getting from their machinery is giving them higher profits. Okay, that can't exist forever. All right, and that dynamic then leads us here to our demand for labor rises. Okay, and again, the bargaining power of workers. Okay, so there was a lag, we can say, where the industrialists were able to become very rich before wages caught up with the earnings that they were making. Okay, here we have something called restrictions on employing women and children in factory hours. Okay, so these restrictions came up as we started to see the social impact of the industrialization. Okay, and we started seeing many people left without their basic needs being met. Okay, and that caused for social change and political change. So these restrictions then made the labor supply fall. You could no longer have children working for you. You could no longer have women working incredibly long hours. Okay, and at the same time, they extended the right to vote. Okay, so once the workers could also vote, they now had more bargaining power and the wages rose. So there was three reasons why the wages rose. Okay, one was because factory production demanded more labor. Okay, as it expanded. The other was for social reasons, right? There was restrictions put on the employment of children and women, and the other one was the extension of the rights to vote. Okay, so by empowering the workers were able to also benefit. And if we look at this in the model, what we're talking about here, we're looking at wages and productivity. Okay, and even as the factories were paying higher wages, okay, the productivity was rising even faster than the wages. So let's see the story here. So we go here. Here we have Watt steam engine. So we're talking about this part right here where we have the better machinery. Okay, the spinning jenny, the steam engine. Okay, production is increasing, wages are staying the same. Okay, and we see that continuing. Then here, okay, we're starting to see how the profits are slowly rising and the wages are not. Okay, moving down here, this is where we now have the 10 Hours Act for women and children. We have the Factory Act where children can only work 6.5 hours a day, no children under the age of 9. So as we're starting to have these conditions take place, this is where we're starting to see the impact on wages, and wages are starting to rise. Okay, so the industrialists were given an opportunity to increase production. Okay, this is efficiency for them, but there came a point where the workers also needed to be included in that. And what's interesting is as wages of the workers rose, so did production as well. So if we keep moving down this model, okay, let's see where we were. We're here. Okay, and the last part here, we have voting rights for all males, and then universal suffrage right there. So wages started to go down. Again, there was that groundswell from the masses. Okay, they demanded their rights, and boom, they were able to pull themselves back up again. All right. So to take a listen to Charest, I think we listened to him in class, but definitely listen to him again. He'll explain to you how population growth, technology, and political events interact to produce that real wage hockey stick. Cool. The last thing that we have is our conclusion, which is basically just looking at firms, right? How firms' choice of production technology depends on the price of inputs, the economic rent. Okay, the fact that the Industrial Revolution happened in England was because labor was expensive there, right? And it became more worthwhile for people to build machines instead of pay workers. Okay, whereas in other countries with cheaper labor, they didn't have that incentive. Okay, we saw the Malthusian vicious cycle in which population growth offset gains in income, created the stagnation, but then we had the permanent technological revolution, which, boom, enabled everyone to escape that trap. Cool. If we go take a look back at our workbook, let's see what else we have here. Here I'm asking you guys a little bit about the escape from the trap and some of the pieces that were important for that. Okay, the three basic institutions of capitalism, private property. Okay, and why that was important. Because there's things that you own, that idea of owning and investing into improving what you already own, okay, is a big incentive. Competition also comes into play there. If it wasn't private property, there wouldn't be as much of an incentive for people to go and take the risk and invest and invent and try to do things differently. Explain how markets can provide both carrots and sticks. Okay, you guys had said that the carrots give you an advantage, right? If you can produce cheaper and better, you have the advantage. I think that word is supposed to be over. Okay, the competition. These are notes that we had taken in class before we went on break. And then the sticks, the deterrence. A punishment could be a strike, less labor, or labor becoming more expensive. So that's how a market can provide a deterrent. Okay. And then production in firms, businesses, rather than families, how did that contribute to the growth of living standards? Here you guys said that firms offer more hours, more jobs, more benefits. Okay. There's also more variance, more diversity, different things that can be getting done, as opposed to a family business where you're just basically working with a local environment and something that's been inherited. Good. So that's the end of our unit. The next thing is quiz 2, which I already showed you an example of. Let me know if you have any questions on that. That's due next week. And then midterm self-evaluate I already did. And we have a new workbook that we're starting next week that's already up in Canvas, but we're not going to go over that today. So that's our lecture. That's our book. That's our workbook. So hopefully you guys are good. If you have any other questions, let me know, and have a great week.